Thank you, Deputy Speaker, and I welcome the opportunity to contribute today to the Firefighters Presumptive Rights Compensation and Fire Services Legislation Amendment. Deputy Speaker, the Leader of the House can try all that she likes to sell this as a modernisation of the fire services, but we all know the reasons why this government is bringing this legislation, and it has absolutely nothing to do with the modernisation of the fire services. There is not a single element of this bill that is written with community safety in mind, or what's best for volunteers, or even about getting a fair EBA deal with paid firefighters, with the CFA's career firefighters, Deputy Speaker. This bill is entirely a political fix for a Premier who has done a deal with one man who exerts an unholy amount of influence over the Premier. Why? That is the question that everybody is asking, but no one is willing to answer. That is the question that my volunteers are asking. Why would you tear apart the greatest volunteer fire service in the world? Why would you do over 60,000 volunteers at the whim of just one man? As I said, it's not about community safety. It's not about protecting the rights of volunteers. We certainly know that much. It's not about a fair EBA. It's never been about those things. There is only one motivation for this, and that is to dig the Premier out of the political crisis that he has made by doing a deal with Peter Marshall. We know that the UFU campaigned for the Labor Party at the last election. In fact, there is a convincing argument that the Labor Party hold government because of the UFU and the door knocking and the campaigning and the polling booths that they manned in key marginal seats. But does that warrant the bullying actions of this Premier and the lengths he has gone to, the people he has sacked to drive through an EBA that is fundamentally just a power grab for Peter Marshall? Last week, Deputy Speaker, I met with volunteers from the Euroa group at Crichtons Creek, and one of the volunteers there, Bernie Wallace, actually said to me, "We never asked for this fight. We have been forced into this by the Andrews government. We didn't ask to be leaving our jobs in the middle of the day to come and fight for our role as volunteers." But that is the position that the Premier and those on the government benches have put these people in. And what's worse, they feel completely abandoned. Why? Because the Premier has gotten rid of every single person that has stood in his way and that has fought for volunteers, from the minister, from their own minister, right through to the board, right through to the CEO, and now the MFB, as we see in this bill. Deputy Speaker, I support the reasoned amendment that has been moved by the member for Murray Plains. I am absolutely disgusted by Labor's decision to tie the compensation of firefighters with cancer to this bill. It is absolutely vile. They are playing politics with cancer sufferers, and I cannot think of a more dog act. That is the only description I can think of. It is an absolutely dog act. It's political treachery. We have said that we are happy to split the bill. There is nothing to stand in the government's road from passing this presumptive legislation today. Nothing at all. And Acting Deputy Speaker, we say that with some concerns about the scheme that the government has proposed, which sets hurdles for volunteers in accessing compensation that are not required for paid firefighters. This is not an equal piece of legislation. This does not provide equal access to presumptive legislation. We have an advisory committee, for example, in this bill, which is asked to offer an expert opinion to the CFA as to whether a volunteer who is applying for compensation has attended fires to the extent reasonably necessary to fulfil their duties as a firefighter. Well, that's very vague, Deputy Speaker. What does "to the extent reasonably necessary" even mean? The bill is silent on those issues, but it is placing hurdles in front of volunteers that do not exist for paid firefighters. Now, we However, Deputy Speaker, believe that the cause of presumptive legislation is too important to wait. We have given the government the option of passing that element of the legislation by splitting the bill immediately today. But we know they don't want to do that because they are playing a political game here where they want the opposition to vote against this so they can run out and tell people that we don't support presumptive legislation. Well, that is not the case, and the volunteers that I represent know that is not the case. There has been no consultation over this bill, Deputy Speaker, and we know that the Volunteers Charter compels the government to consult with the CFA volunteers about all matters which might reasonably be expected to affect them. There was no consultation with the VFBV about this bill at all, and there's been no public scrutiny. This is the comment from the VFBV in the day that the Minister for Emergency Services announced this legislation. It's important to understand that none of these reforms have been the subject of consultation with VFBV. The Minister's comments that we've been consulted are false and misleading. Despite rumours about the proposed split circulating for some weeks now, there's been no consultation with VFBV and no briefing of any detail whatsoever. The government lied about the consultation it claimed to have undertaken, and not only that, it knows, as the member for Ripon said earlier, it knows that it has acted illegally by bringing this bill. Why else would this legislation basically legislate away its obligations to consult with volunteers? That is absolutely disgusting. They've broken the Volunteers Charter and they have acted illegally. This whole bill has been concocted by a secret subcommittee of Cabinet behind closed doors. And this is what one of the volunteers from my area, Lockie Gales, says about it. He sent me an email last week. He said, "Dear Ms Ryan, I'm a senior volunteer leader from CFA District 23 and I'm writing to express my deep concern with the latest Andrews government's plans for Victoria's fire services." He goes on to say, "As a CFA volunteer of 30 years, I've undertaken every operational role and qualification there is. I'm currently a Level 3 Incident Controller accredited by EMV and CFA. I understand the issues at play here and have independently formed a view that what is happening here is an appalling issue of governance. It will not reflect well on the Victorian Parliament to acquiesce to the kind of abuse of proper process that is occurring here." And he concludes by saying, "All I'd ask for is reasonable consultation, proper process and constructive dialogue with the government. All these things are enshrined under the CFA Act. It's the least our community deserves when the stakes are so high. But not even that could this government afford our volunteers." Deputy Speaker, communities and brigades across my electorate understand the value of surge capacity. We have been the beneficiaries of people coming out of, volunteers coming out of the interface areas of Melbourne in some major bushfires, Black Saturday among them, the Kilmore-Micklem fires. This bill, in setting up Fire Rescue Victoria, will fundamentally damage that surge capacity. There's no clarification in this bill as to what the chain of command will be for volunteers who are co-located in FRV stations. And it appears that those volunteers will have no authority to make decisions in the event of a fire unless it's at the control or request of FRV firefighters. If they're not going to be turned out, why on earth, if they're not going to be able to make decisions, why on earth are they going to stay? Why are they going to maintain that level of training? It's a simple fact that they just won't. And in fact, the government knows it because it's in its own budget's papers this year. It has predicted a reduction of 10% within the volunteer numbers, CFA numbers just this year, a drop of 4,200 CFA volunteers. Deputy Speaker, there is so much more about this bill that I wish I had time to talk about, the impact on the fire services property levy. But let me conclude by saying this. Nobody asked for this. Nobody recommended this. Not one of 8 reviews recommended this. The member for Mordialloc is correct. Peter Marshall did ask for it. He was the only one. We can pass presumptive legislation today. No one's standing in the road of that at all. But we won't just stand by and let you destroy the CFA, one of the greatest volunteer organisations in the world. Shame on those on the opposite side of the House for doing that. Shame on those MPs who report to represent
Members' time has
country communities.
expired. The member for Mass